The sky hung low that morning, swollen with clouds that refused to cry. It was as if even the heavens didn't know how to grieve for Jack. I stood beside the fresh mound of earth, my black dress clinging to me in the wind, my hands numb from both the cold and the weight of finality. Before we begin, I'd love to hear where you're watching from, and if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The priest had just finished speaking. The mourners had begun to drift, offering soft condolences and avoiding eye contact. And I was there, still, frozen, rooted, not ready to leave the place where the last trace of my husband now rested. That's when it happened. Daniel, Jack's younger brother, stepped toward me, his expression unreadable. I remember thinking he was about to offer some comfort, maybe a memory of Jack to share, something human. But instead, he dropped to one knee right there, on the damp grass, in front of Jack's grave, and held out a small velvet box. "You shouldn't have to be alone, Jess," he said. "We've always been close. Let me take care of you. Marry me." Time didn't stop. It shattered. The silence that followed was deafening. Murmurs turned to gasps. A few guests turned away in disbelief. Others stood frozen like I was, unable to process the grotesque collision of mourning and manipulation unfolding before them. I didn't speak, I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply stared at the box, at his face, at the grave behind him. And then I walked away. Not because I had answers, but because something in that moment cracked open inside me. Something long buried under the routines of marriage, the weight of caregiving, the masks of family loyalty. Daniel's proposal was more than inappropriate. It was revealing. A window into something I had never dared to question. Why did it feel less like love and more like entitlement? Why did he seem so certain I would say yes? Why had Jack been so distant in his final months? I didn't know it yet, but that kneeling man and that single outrageous gesture would be the spark that would set off a chain of discoveries I could never have imagined. I had buried my husband, but now I was about to exhume the truth. And that, more than any, terrified me. Before the confusion, before the whispers, and certainly before the moment that shattered everything, Jessica's life had been, by most standards, quietly beautiful. She met Jack when they were both barely adult SWO dreamers, with little in their pockets but an abundance of hope. They married young, not out of haste but out of certainty. Through the early years of shared ramen dinners and secondhand furniture, they built a life grounded in kindness, patience, and a fierce commitment to each other. Jack was not a man of grand gestures, but his love was expressed in the everyday, warming her coffee cup before pouring, keeping her favorite blanket neatly folded on the couch, placing a gentle hand on her back as they crossed the street. He was steady, not flashy, humble, not loud. Jessica used to joke that he loved her the way a tree loves sunlight, quietly, constantly, without needing applause. Together, they raised 2 children. Mornings were filled with mismatched socks, forgotten lunches, and sleepy carpool rides. Evenings brought the rhythm of homework help, shared dinners, and stories at bedtime. Their home was not picture perfect, but it was full of laughter, warmth, and safety. Jessica often thought, this must be what people mean when they say they're blessed. And yet, there was always Daniel. Jack's younger brother, Daniel, had been around since the beginning. He never missed a family gathering. He always came with a joke on his lips and a teasing tone in his voice. But there was something in his comments, subtle, offhand, that lingered longer than laughter. "Look at you two," he once said, clinking his glass at a Thanksgiving dinner. "Still playing house like it's a fairy tale. Some of us prefer reality." At first, Jessica thought it was harmless jealousy. After all, Daniel had never settled down. He bounced between cities, jobs, and women. He often rolled his eyes at domestic bliss, claiming he wasn't made for that kind of life. But sometimes, his gaze lingered too long, and his jokes cut a little too deep. Still, Jessica never imagined those remarks would amount to more than brotherly envy. She didn't know then that even in the safest homes, darkness can wait quietly at the edges, wrapped in charm and familiarity, waiting for a moment to step in. It started subtly, a smirk here, a comment there. Jessica first noticed it during a family dinner, only weeks after Jack's funeral. The seat at the head of the table her husband's seat was pulled out by Daniel before she could even react. He chuckled as he sat, nudging her gently on the arm. "Looks like someone has to take charge now," he said, lighthearted on the surface but heavy underneath. No one laughed, but no one objected either. At first, Jessica told herself it was his way of coping. Everyone grieves differently, she thought. But as time passed, Daniel's presence grew more persistent, more invasive. He was at the house nearly every day, fixing a leaky faucet, suggesting dinner ideas, offering to help with things Jack used to handle. Always helpful, always around, too much around. He would refer to himself jokingly as the man of the house now, especially in front of her teenage sons. Once, when she voiced an opinion during a conversation about the boys' school plans, Daniel interrupted her with a grin. "Let's be honest," he said. "If Jack were here, he'd agree with me." The room went quiet. Her son shifted uncomfortably. Jessica blinked hard, swallowing the burn behind her eyes. Each time it happened, she told herself not to overthink. Maybe she was being sensitive. Maybe grief was making her see things that weren't there. But deep down, she knew the truth. Daniel wasn't stepping in to help. He was slowly stepping over a boundary, one Jack would have never let anyone cross. It wasn't just his words, it was his tone. The way he looked at her like she was fragile, like her voice didn't carry weight anymore. The way he made suggestions sound like orders. The way, at a recent dinner, he raised a glass and said, "To new beginnings," locking eyes with her across the table in a way that made her skin crawl. Jessica felt herself shrinking, little by little. Her role in the family she helped build was being chipped away not by a stranger, but by someone Jack once called brother. And still, she said nothing. Not because she didn't feel the sting, but because part of her still wanted to believe it was just grief talking, that Daniel's awkward jokes and subtle encroachments were harmless, that everything would settle down. But deep inside, something had shifted, and she knew, if she didn't reclaim her place soon, she would disappear from her own story. The funeral had concluded, leaving behind a quiet hush that settled over the house like a heavy blanket. Jessica moved through the rooms, offering comfort to guests, her presence a pillar of grace amidst the sorrow. She had spent the day honoring Jack's memory, ensuring that every detail reflected the man he was. Later, seeking a moment of solitude, Jessica stepped into the hallway and overheard Daniel speaking with a group of friends. His voice, though hushed, carried a tone of condescension. "Jessica's always been so dependent on Jack," Daniel said. "I don't know how she'll manage without him. But don't worry, I'll step in and take care of her now." The words struck Jessica like a blow. In that instant, the grief she had been holding at bay surged forward, mingled with a profound sense of betrayal. She felt exposed, her vulnerabilities laid bare by someone she had considered family. Jessica didn't confront Daniel. She didn't make a scene. Instead, she returned to the gathering, her demeanor composed, her smile gentle. But inside, a decision had been made. She would no longer allow herself to be diminished or defined by others' perceptions. In the days that followed, Jessica began to reclaim her autonomy. She organized her affairs, sought counsel, and started to envision a life where she was not merely surviving, but thriving. Her actions were quiet, deliberate, and resolute. Daniel's comments had intended to cast her as weak, but Jessica's response demonstrated strength. She chose dignity over confrontation, self-respect over acquiescence. And in doing so, she began to heal. Not just from the loss of her husband, but from the underestimation of those around her. This chapter of Jessica's life marked the beginning of a journey towards self-empowerment, a testament to the resilience that lies within when one chooses to honor their worth. Jessica didn't leave with a storm. She didn't slam doors or raise her voice. There was no final argument, no teary breakdown. Just a note, folded once, placed neatly on the dining room table. It read, "I'm not broken, I just need space to breathe." By the time Daniel got home, the house was still. Her keys were gone, her favorite scarf missing from the hallway hook. The scent of her rose hand cream still lingered faintly in the air, like a whisper no one heard in time. Jessica had taken the old red car Jack left her and driven until the sea greeted her with open skies and salt-kissed wind. A small town by the coast, the kind of place where no one knew her name or her story, and that, for the first time in decades, felt like freedom. She rented a tiny cottage with peeling blue shutters and a crooked mailbox, just 2 blocks from the water. The woman who handed her the keys didn't ask questions. Jessica didn't offer explanations. She bought herself a kettle, some tea, and a second-hand journal. The first few days passed like mist. She walked along the beach in the early morning, letting the sand erase the heaviness from her chest. She read novels without checking the time. She sat by the window and let the light move across the floor without feeling like she had to be useful. One afternoon, while sorting through the old leather suitcase she had packed in haste, Jessica found something she hadn't realized she'd brought: Jack's journal. She hesitated before opening it, unsure if reading it would comfort her or undo her. But curiosity is a gentle force. It doesn't knock, it seeps in. She began reading. The entries were dated years ago, written in Jack's careful handwriting, thoughts about life, about grief, and to her quiet astonishment about Daniel. I worry about how entitled he's become, about how he speaks to Jessica when he thinks I'm not listening. I don't want her to carry more burdens when I'm gone. I've spoken with the lawyer. The trust will protect her. Daniel will be furious, but he won't be able to touch it. She won't be left at anyone's mercy, especially not his. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She read the final entry twice. She gave everything to this family. If I can give her peace even after I'm gone, I'll have done something right. It was then that Jessica realized Jack hadn't just loved her. He had seen her. He had understood what she had never dared say aloud. That her quiet strength wasn't an invitation to be overlooked. That her kindness wasn't weakness. That love, real love, protects. And with that realization, something inside Jessica shifted. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She had chosen peace. And in this small, salt-stained town, she would begin again. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's mother, but as Jessica whole, seen, and finally, free. Jessica didn't scream. She didn't throw accusations or pack her bags in the heat of emotion. That was never her way. Her power had always been in her patience, her ability to endure storms without letting them tear her apart. But silence, she now knew, wasn't the same as surrender. So, she began. It started with a meeting at her attorney's office. Mr. Reflew. Roland Mercer, a sharp-minded man who had handled her late husband's estate, sat across from her, eyebrows raised when she quietly asked for a full audit of her legal holdings. Within 30 minutes, the truth was confirmed. Jessica still owned everything. The house, the accounts, the shares in the family company, all still legally in her name. Her son Daniel had accessius but only as an administrator, not an owner. His confidence, his control, had been built on illusion. Jessica had never questioned it before, trusting that he had her best interests at heart. But now, trust had been replaced with clarity. She didn't confront him. Instead, she adjusted her posture in the attorney's leather chair and simply said, "Let's begin with the passwords." Within days, every digital lock on her financial life had changed. New online banking credentials, a new email address, credit monitoring activated, shared accounts frozen. Her signature was removed from documents that granted Daniel power of attorney, revoked quietly, through legal protocol, without announcement. Her phone remained silent. Daniel called, she didn't answer. He texted, she didn't reply. He knocked on her door one afternoon, all smiles and false charm. She simply didn't open it. Jessica didn't owe anyone a performance. Not anymore. She arranged for her mail to be rerouted to a post office box. She set up a new checking account at a bank across town and transferred enough to cover her life and more. The rest? She moved into a trust-protected, secure, and out of reach. Each step she took was calm, methodical, without apology. She met with her accountant. She reviewed the estate plan. She restructured her will again, no explanations, no announcements. Just quiet adjustments that repositioned her life back into her own hands. For the first time in years, Jessica felt the ground beneath her feet solidify. There was no dramatic showdown, no shouting match across a dining table, just stillness, the kind that follows when you stop asking for someone to see you and start seeing yourself again. In her journal, she wrote one line: "No one gets to hold what they did not earn, especially not my trust." Daniel, sensing the shift, grew restless. He called her friends, sent word through relatives. "She's confused," he said. "She's being paranoid." But no one saw confusion in Jessica. They saw something else steal. And so the silence between them grew. Not bitter, not cruel, just quiet. A space that once held manipulation was now filled with peace. Jessica wasn't trying to punish her son. She was simply reclaiming her life. One password at a time, one paper at a time, one boundary at a time. And with every step, she felt less like someone's burden and more like herself again. 2 months had passed since Jessica quietly walked away from the life she once built with Daniel. In that time, she hadn't shouted, she hadn't begged, she hadn't tried to explain herself to those who never truly listened. What she did do, though, was prepare. With every silent morning, she strengthened her resolve. With every legal meeting and signature, she took back a piece of her own power. Now, on a pale Thursday morning, Jessica returned. There was no dramatic entrance, no suitcase dragged behind her, no crowd gathered in the driveway. Just a woman in a navy coat holding a sealed envelope in one hand and her spine straighter than it had been in years. She rang the doorbell of the house that still bore her name on the deed. Daniel opened it, eyes widening not in surprise, but in recognition. He had been waiting for this, dreading it, hoping it might not come. Jessica didn't say hello. She stepped inside without asking, walked past him, and placed the envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside were the updated documents the trust Harold had created years ago, now reactivated. A court order affirming her full rights to the house, and a deadline, 30 days to vacate. Daniel reached for the papers, his mouth parting as if to speak. But Jessica raised her hand just slightly, just enough. "No explanations," her eyes said, "no excuses." And for once, he said nothing. He nodded, a slow, broken gesture of understanding. She turned and left the way she came, her heels quiet against the tile floor, the door clicking shut behind her like a final period at the end of a sentence. Neighbors might have assumed a confrontation. Some may have expected shouting or tears. But the most powerful battles, Jessica knew, are the ones fought without noise, without rage, without letting someone else write the ending for you. In the silence that followed, there was no victory parade. Just stillness, a home slowly returning to balance, and a woman reclaiming her place not because she shouted for it, but because she never stopped owning it in the first place. Some endings don't need fireworks, just clarity, courage, and the quiet strength to close the door behind you. The envelope was thick. Inside it, page after page of bank transfers, email correspondence, and signatures, some forged, some subtly altered. Jessica didn't cry when the lawyer slid the documents across the table. She didn't gasp. She simply exhaled, as though her soul had known long before her mind could accept it. Daniel had been planning this long before Jack's final days. He'd posed as Jack in financial documents, redirecting portions of Jack's assets into accounts under his control. He had even attempted to change the beneficiary of a trust stone Jack had created solely for Jessica, causing a signature that, to anyone else, might have passed scrutiny. But Jack had been meticulous. A retired naval officer, he knew the importance of leaving no room for manipulation. His original trust remained legally airtight. And now, the truth stood undeniable, backed by timestamps, security camera records from the notary office, and one critical witness, the notary herself, who remembered Jessica's absence and flagged the irregularity in her private log, though never acted until now. Jessica didn't call Daniel. She didn't drive to confront him. She didn't post angry messages online or lash out through lawyers. Instead, she quietly compiled every document, scanned each page, and sent one email. The subject line read, "For your understanding." Attached were the files. No commentary, no anger, no threats. Just the truth. She sent the same email to her younger daughter, to her late husband's old business partner, and to the lawyer who had once advised Daniel. She didn't seek justice in the form of courtrooms or conflict. She handed them a mirror. Whether they looked or not, reflected or not, was their choice. Jessica went back to her kitchen and continued peeling apples for a pie she was baking for her neighbors. Outside, the sea whispered against the sand as if nothing had changed. And perhaps, in some way, it hadn't. Only now, the silence no longer belonged to a woman erased but to one who had chosen dignity over drama. Because sometimes, the most powerful statement is saying nothing at all. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic apology at the doorstep or tearful reunion in the rain. Instead, it came in the form of 2 separate phone calls, quiet, halting, and soaked in the weight of realization. First, it was Laura. Her voice cracked almost immediately after saying, "Hi, Mom." She didn't try to explain or justify, just said the words Margaret never expected to hear. "I'm sorry, Mom. For everything. For the things I said. For the things I didn't say. I don't know what I was thinking. Or maybe I just didn't want to think at all." Then, days later, it was Nathan. He was slower to speak. But when he did, the truth came raw and unfiltered. "I heard about the well house. What you're doing. It made me realize. I never really saw you, did I? Just what you did for us." Both times, Margaret listened in silence, her heart soft but steady. She didn't rush to soothe or absolve. Instead, she offered a quiet, truth-owned sentence each time, spoken with the calm of someone who had made peace with herself. "Just remember how it felt," she said, "when you realized you'd forgotten your mother." There was no anger in her voice, just reflection, and that, more than any scolding, left the deepest impression. Over the following weeks, they called more regularly. No more awkward obligation, no more checking off boxes. They asked how she was, how the garden on the rooftop was coming along, if she still made her cinnamon tea in the evenings. And Margaret answered not because she owed them anything, but because she chose to. She no longer needed their validation, their praise, or even their consistency. But she welcomed their présence as a condition of motherhood, but as a quiet act of grace. Forgiveness, for her, was not something to be demanded or bartered for. It was something she extended like the warmth of sunlight in her terms, when she was ready. The bond wasn't the same as before. It was more honest now, more fragile, but also more real. And Margaret had learned that receiving someone back doesn't mean forgetting the pain. They could walk forward together, while still honoring the silence that had once taught them everything. Jessica stood at the edge of the garden Jack once lovingly tended, her hands gently brushing the soft petals of the hydrangeas he used to trim with such care. The afternoon light spilled golden across the yard, and for the first time in what felt like years, the wind stirred the old wind chime by the porch's soft, silvery notes, echoing like a long-forgotten greeting. She didn't cry. There had already been tears too many for the things lost, for the years blurred by silence and sacrifice. What remained now was not sorrow, but a quiet acceptance. A truth that had settled deep in her bones. She was no longer the woman who waited for someone else to give her worth. Not Jack, not their son, not the community that once dismissed her presence as background noise. Jessica had reclaimed her voice, not by shouting, not through vengeance, but by walking away from anything that reduced her to less than she was. Her strength had not come from confrontation, but from the slow, steady decision to choose herself every day, in every small, deliberate act. The garden was blooming again, not because Jack was gone, but because she had stayed. Because she had finally realized that what they built together did not end with him. It changed, evolved, and in some ways, began anew with her. Behind her, the kitchen windows glowed softly. A pot of soup simmered on the stove, enough for her and the 2 older neighbors she now welcomed for dinner once a week. She ran writing workshops on Wednesdays. She taught basic budgeting to women at the community center. She smiled more not because life was easier, but because it was finally hers. When someone asked if she had forgiven Jack, she smiled and said, Forgiveness isn't always the point. Understanding is. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't rewrite the past. She simply refused to be edited out of her own story. Jessica stepped further into the garden, the wind chimes singing gently above her, like punctuation to a sentence finally spoken aloud. This wasn't a perfect ending, but it was hers. And that was more than enough.